or in, and while many of us have our philosophical differences, the great thing is that we come in the spirit of Malcolm. We come in the spirit of Malcolm, and we are able to get among black people and discuss our issues. Get amongst black people. And so I just want all of you to know that Dr. West insisted that not only will he make his presentation, but he wants a lively Q&A session after it. Dr. Cornel West. And so I want everybody to get off of their feet and put their hands together for our speaker for tonight, Dr. Cornel West. Dr. Cornel West, speaker for tonight.
Lord. Good God Almighty. Lord. Thank you so very much for that kind and generous introduction. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight, and I look forward to our dialogue, our critical exchange and public conversation. I'd like to thank especially Brother Alton Maddox Jr. He's a long-distance runner in the struggle for black freedom. No doubt about it. And you can't be a long-distance runner in the struggle for black freedom unless you have a deep and abiding love of black people. Brother Maddox has that love when you look at the level of his sacrifice and his service, his willingness to take risk and still somehow preserve his sanity and spiritual health in such a situation. Reminds me of that poem by Sterling Brown, with strong men and women we must add, keep on coming against the odds. Why? Because, as we know, we people of African descent are people whose history has pushed our backs against the wall and life has knocked us to our knees, and there are times in which all we can do is sing a song, say a prayer, preach a sermon, crack a smile, or just be silent, but we refuse to allow misery to have the last word. That's a very rich tradition. That's what I like about the United African Movement coming out of the rich Garveyite stream within the black freedom struggle. That it keeps the focus where it belongs, namely on black suffering and black social misery and black pain and black hurt and black sadness and black sorrow and black agony and black anguish. And there's not enough movements around. There's not enough spokespersons and leaders around who will speak with a boldness and fearlessness and sense of urgency about black suffering and black social misery. I stand before you tonight as a small part of a great and grand tradition of struggle. A struggle for decency and dignity, struggle for freedom and democracy and self-determination. And we must all never forget that tradition is not something you inherit. If you want it, you must obtain it with great labor and toil and engagement and sacrifice and service. You don't gain it by means of some natural osmosis. You have to fight for it. A tradition that I have the privilege of being a part of and decided long ago that I was going to spend my time and energy in life if need be. A tradition that has produced such giants as Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman and Ida B. Wells Barnett and Marcus Garvey and Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer, Martin King and Malcolm X. One could go on, but don't forget the anonymous ones the nameless ones who labored in the vineyard, who made it possible for us to preserve our sanity and our spiritual and mental health. They're part of that same tradition too. And that tradition has tried to respond to the perennial white supremacist assault on black beauty, trying to convince black people that they have the wrong hips and lips and noses and hair texture and skin pigmentation, that the ideology of white supremacy begins with the degradation of the black body. There's an aesthetic dimension to it. That's what makes it visceral. To degrade the black body in order to control the black body, exploit it, oppress it, contain it, circumscribe it. But we are able to keep track of the psychic scars and the ontological bruises and the existential wounds in such a way that we can still forge some spaces for black love and black care and black concern and black community and black solidarity. That has been part of the rich history of the tradition that I take great joy in being a part of. It's attacked not solely on black beauty, but on black intelligence. We know that in the court, the life of the mind, that black folk are guilty before proven innocent. Always having to prove themselves, always feeling as if, and rightly so, in terms of the power of white supremacist ideology in the last 300 years of having to begin with the burden of meeting the standard. Begin with the burden of trying to persuade others that somehow our humanity is something to prove rather than take for granted. Attack on black capacity and black capability. In many ways, we must begin then where the great W. Boyce begins in that classic of 1903, The Souls of Black Folk. I'm sure you all recall. Begins with a poem. It's called The Crying of Water. In those 13 lines, Du Bois invokes cries 8 times, echoing the cries of fellow African brothers and sisters as they jumped off boats or were pushed off or did not make the treacherous transatlantic voyage. And the theme of that poem is madness. Because part of the miracle of being part the family of people of African descent is, how is it that we did not and have not gone mad? Why? Why? Because our New World experience, our modern experience begins with the African encounter with the absurd. The absurd in America and the absurd as America. And by the absurd, what I mean is finding oneself in a situation that is so utterly irrational and capricious and arbitrary that it makes no sense whatsoever, but you have to deal with it anyway. And that's why Du Bois goes on in that second moment in that first chapter with just the musical bars, no lyrics to the Negro spiritual. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah. What a dialectical reversal. Talking about trouble. Talking about sadness and sorrow. And then glory, hallelujah. Where does it come from? That combative spirituality of black folk. Du Bois juxtaposes this sense of madness on the one hand and a sense of joy on the other as the fundamental dialectic of being of African descent in the New World.